Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. So today I want to dig deep, and this is actually a re-recording because our original recording of this episode got super messed up from the audio. No idea how that happened. So anyways, I'm doing this again. Hopefully it's just as good, if not better, than the first time around. So I want to talk about iron, anemia, and ferritin today. And we've been posting some content around this the last handful of weeks, maybe even a month at this point as of the release of this episode. And I don't think I realized how many misconceptions there are when it comes to ferritin levels, iron levels, anemia, and I've just been really blown away to realize how big of an issue this is and how big of a misunderstanding there is when it really comes to all of this and the relationship of iron, getting iron into our cells, ferritin, what even is ferritin? How is ferritin impacted? How does Western medicine look at iron and anemia? And from a functional perspective, how do we really look at this, dive deeper into this, and understand bigger root causes when it comes to actual iron deficiency, anemia issues, and non-anemia issues where ferritin is still an issue, whether that's low or high. So I'm going to dig into this. And I shared a story the first time around, and I'm gonna share this again. I think I'm probably gonna keep it a little bit shorter. You know me, I go off on some rants sometimes, and this is definitely a rant that I went on in the first round of this. But I do feel like this is important to share. It's actually two stories here. So the first one is about me. And I was diagnosed as anemic pretty early on. I always ate meat, but growing up, my eating was a little bit odd. I went through, especially from what I can remember, and remember, I don't remember everything but from growing up. I have a lot of chunks of time that are missing from my life from trauma. And I don't feel like protein was a huge priority for me outside of dinner time. And I'm sure that played a role in all of this. My period frequency also played a big role for a while before I got on birth control. I was getting a period like every other week. So I was bleeding quite a bit, pretty regularly. I was also dehydrated, chronically dehydrated, which probably did not help. And then when I was going through my own functional health journey, it was brought to my attention, so to speak, at some point during working with one practitioner. And this is a practitioner that is trained in the program that I consistently talk about. I never want to mention their name, and they do a horrible job when it comes to so many things, including helping their practitioners understand blood labs. And they only teach ferritin, which is a huge mistake. And so for a long time when I was dealing with chronic health issues, my ferritin was low. I mean, like pretty low. I mean, definitely under 10 a handful of times when I look back at my old labs. Certainly like 10 to 20, somewhere in that range, a couple times too. And so because of that, I was put on iron. And I was put on iron for a long time. I was taking a multivitamin that had iron. And keep in mind that this practitioner, through no fault of her own, it was her training. And this is a big program. This is a well-respected, generally speaking, practitioner who was first trained in Western medicine and has his own labs, has his own supplements, which is the only thing that he really trains in if we dive deeper into his program. So I was put on this multivitamin that had a decent amount of iron on it I was probably on it for a year and a half, maybe a little bit more. And I have suffered from iron oversaturation and continue, by the way, for years now. I mean, we're talking 5+ years And part of that is I had a fear of donating blood for a long time. And I just donated blood for the first time last year. I did several protocols. I have switched out some things. Like I don't use cast iron anymore just because I've, once again, too much iron. I make sure that anything supplement wise does not have iron in it. I certainly do eat lots of meat. I eat a good amount of red meat. So I know I am getting it from there. Like I know I'm getting plenty of it from a nutritional perspective. And I'm trying to avoid anything excess because I already have iron oversaturation issues. And it's close. Right now, the last time I ran my labs a few months ago, I was down to about 42% for iron saturation. 40 is kind of the higher end that we like. And I've been in the mid 50s and not felt good. And I'll tell you that iron oversaturation can very much feel like iron undersaturation or anemia. So, I mean, you can lose the hair, you can have issues with your skin and nails. It can contribute to tons of other nutrient deficiencies. I still have a little bit of a lingering zinc deficiency. And I do think that is because of the iron oversaturation issues. Yeah, I mean, the fatigue. I would say fatigue and hair loss are the two kind of biggest things that I experienced at the height of those. I don't really have those anymore. And that's because I'm close. I'm like barely over what I would consider a more optimal range. And I am gonna go donate blood at least 1 to 2 more times in the next 6 months to continue to work on this and try and get my iron levels down to a more optimal range. And also keep in mind, I have a very normal, a very healthy period every single month, and I still continue to have iron oversaturation issues. So it can take some time for that to resolve itself. And I had iron oversaturation while my ferritin was still low, which is 100% possible. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the spectrum, my fiance Jonathan, so when we ran his labs early this year, before he got any sort of diagnosis or anything, when he was starting really in the heat of his health issues, we ran his iron panel and he was at 8% iron saturation. I don't even remember what his ferritin was, but the iron saturation was at 8%. Optimal range is 25 to 40, severely low. And I was so concerned about this. It was such a big deal. I actually asked for an iron infusion. If anyone, I asked many, many doctors, can we do an iron infusion? Like, is that on the table? Is that a possibility? And because his hemoglobin and hematocrit were okay according to them, he was not a candidate. And no one seemed to care about his iron saturation levels, which is mind blowing. And I'm going to dig into what all of these things actually mean and why we look at them and all that kind of stuff too. But I was totally blown away. I mean, cancer was the clear reason why this happened. And we were able to bring up his iron saturation even through chemo, which can contribute to, I mean, they run the CBC every single time before he gets his chemo infusion, and they would check just to make sure because chemo can deplete iron even more. And we were able to bring it up into optimal ranges the very last time that we ran his labs in September or October. And they were back into an optimal range, which was so good, so great to see. And it really didn't take that long. I only had him on some supplemental support for a couple months, and his levels came back, which was amazing to see. But this really goes to show how Western medicine, and once again, even functional medicine, can really get so much of this wrong. And whether your ferritin and iron is high or low, we need to understand why. If we want to understand root causes and how to come out of this situation effectively and ideally not go back into a situation like this where we are chronically low and or high on anything. Ideally, we want everything to be right smack in the middle in optimal ranges and more importantly, in our specific optimal ranges where we feel good. And so we need to take all of the symptoms, everyone's health history, along with the labs into account when we look at this. So let's start by digging a little bit deeper here into understanding when we actually run labs related to iron, what should we run? And what do actually a lot of these things mean? And I am going to share in the show notes our anemia, we call it like an anemia panel, where if you have been suffering for a long time and we have true anemia, I would ask for these things because they all play a really important role here. Then when we do follow-ups, we don't run the same panel. We run a much less extensive panel because ideally the first panel gave us not only insight into iron saturation, key nutrients related to the absorption of iron, plus a bunch of other things that impact iron itself, iron absorption itself. And we shouldn't have to look at all of those things again after we're doing this. And then I also am in this episode, am going to talk about different ways that Western medicine may look at this, and then also and try to fix it. Symptom, really, let's be honest, it's symptom managing. And then from a more holistic perspective, what are we looking at? How do we support the body and understanding bigger root causes, and also making sure we're getting a lot of these iron markers into more optimal ranges, because this, for me, can be a pretty dire and necessary symptom manager temporarily. For some people, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, this can be really important. So let's get into what are we actually looking at when we're looking at these things, and why do we need to look at all of these things? So let's first look at iron itself. So if we look at serum iron, and I'm going to give lab ranges for some of these things, not for all of them, for a variety of reasons, but I am going to give some specific ranges for a lot of these things. And keep in mind, these are US units. For some of these things, international units are different. If you want international units, we do work with clients all over the world. And I do have like a really lovely cheat sheet to do this. There's also easy ways to convert online from either international units to American units or American units to international units. And some of these things do overlap, just by the way. And sometimes we just need to move some decimal points around to get the most accurate way to look at these things cohesively. So serum iron, we typically want between 70 and 100. Now, we need to understand what are we running when it comes to serum iron itself. So serum iron is iron in the blood that is outside of the cells. So that is iron that is like in our bodies, in our bloodstream, but it's not what's inside of our cell. Super important distinction, because when we look at just serum iron, okay, great. If we're having an issue with getting enough serum iron, but we have enough getting to our cells, that represents a specific pattern. And if we have too much iron in the blood, but not enough getting into our cells, that also gives us an insight into different things. So all of these things are really important and provide a lot of value. So serum iron outside of the cell. So if we have too much, iron overload is the big one. If we have a pretty high amount, 70 to 110 is the range here, we want to look at and rule out hemochromatosis. So you want to go see a hematologist, rule out hemochromatosis. I don't see it that often. I have worked with a handful of clients with hemochromatosis. It's not super common. And for anyone with iron oversaturation, that's like pretty significant, especially when we can't pinpoint a specific supplement or reason why someone has iron oversaturation. We want to rule out hemochromatosis and make sure that is not playing a role, because that's a totally different ballgame than just iron oversaturation for a variety of the other reasons that we may experience. If we have it too high, we can also look at the liver. And is there some stuff going on with the liver itself? So this is where a metabolic panel would become really important. Things like AST, ALT, alkaline phosphatase, GGT. Those are some of the big ones, big liver enzyme markers that we want to look at and make sure and just see where those are and make sure ideally they're in a pretty good spot. Once again, if we have too much iron outside of the cells and not enough inside the cells, this can indicate nutrient deficiencies, where we're missing certain key nutrients needed to get that iron from in the bloodstream inside of the cells. There's a lot of nutrients that go into this. So just a handful I'm going to list off the top of my head. Essentially all of your B vitamins, particularly though B6, B9, B12. Although we could argue that other B vitamins also play a big role in this process. Copper, Man, those are two really big ones. And the ratio between zinc and copper is also really, really, really important. We also want to look at vitamin A. We can also look at vitamin C. So there's some other things. Those are the big ones. I'd say there are a couple other smaller nutrients that potentially might want to look at. Methylmalonic acid is one that I'm going to reference a little bit later, MMA. And typically, we're not going to run those markers right off the bat unless we see pretty consistent patterns here. Now, if serum iron is low, iron deficiency, we want to look at first and foremost, especially we want to look at iron saturation and TIBC, which are the two markers I'm going to get to right after this. Inflammation and infection. These are massive, massive root causes to low iron and low ferritin. I'll also say they can also drive ferritin sky high. And that's what makes this challenging. We also need to understand if there's inflammatory issues, why do we have inflammation? What is the root cause of that inflammation? Why is our body so inflamed? What is going on? And we need to peel back some layers there. Same thing with infection. Okay, well, do we have some chronic viral infection issues? Do we have like bacterial infection issues? What is going on? And what are the bigger root causes of those infection type issues in the first place? I'll tell you, if it's a chronic viral issue, we need to look at what else the immune system is busy doing and handling. It's actually quite common to see this. And I'll say parasite overgrowth is a massive root cause of a lot of this. I'll also say with low ferritin, high ferritin, but particularly low iron and low iron saturation, parasites are a massive, massive root cause of this. And I'm not talking you got ringworm, you got a specific pinworm. I'm talking, we all have parasites in our body. And for a variety of reasons, whether that's exposure, whether that's our defenses, especially liver health, toxin load, all of these things can feed and fuel parasite overgrowth issues within our body that normally wouldn't be a big deal because we all have parasites, not a big deal until a lot of our defenses go down and our body can no longer handle it. And or we've got lots of things in our body, circulating our body, that are feeding the parasites. And this is really where it becomes like a pretty big issue for so many people. And we see so many chronic health issues as a result of this. We also may have issues with copper. Now, I'm going to talk about copper a little bit more when I talk about ceruloplasmin here in just a bit. But there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to copper. And a handful of years ago, there was a whole big movement in the holistic health space around copper toxicity and not quite understanding the role that copper plays. And we have bound and unbound copper within our body. And copper plays a really big role in a lot of things. One of those things is iron and getting iron inside of our cells. And there is a methodology, we can probably call it, it's probably a good term for it, called the RCP, the root cause protocol. We have talked about that in at least one other episode, if not a couple. And the RCP really revolves around copper. First and foremost, copper is like the big thing that it really focuses on, kind of more broad spectrum. It focuses on mineral balancing, which totally on board with. Yes, minerals go a really long way here. And my big issue with them is that it can take the body a really long time to balance minerals. And if someone is chronically ill and really not feeling good, I'm not going to put someone through an RCP or refer out to an RCP practitioner because what could take me a year or less to help someone heal could take 5 or 10 years to heal through the RCP. And by the way, I've seen this and I follow many RCP practitioners, and I mean, years and years and years and years later, they're still suffering with the same issues. And I'm like, I get it. For me, I think it's really valuable, for me and my own health where I am, really valuable. Yeah, let's focus on minerals. Let's focus on mineral balancing and make sure everything's in a really good spot to maintain good health, optimal health, balance, all those kind of things. But I also resolved most of my chronic issues already. I'm just not I just see it taking too long for people who are in like chronically ill circumstances where I know how that feels. Like, and it can take years to even find a practitioner who will listen to you, let alone someone who understands root cause healing and bigger root causes. I mean, we find mold all the time in mold toxicity issues in people all the time, and they've been working with other practitioners for 1 to 10 years without any major changes. So I'm not going to put someone through another 5 to 10 year protocol to try and balance their minerals so their body can be in a more optimal level. I'm going to use a variety of other resources that I also have in my toolbox to help them heal faster. And then long term, yeah, mineral balancing is amazing and great and super helpful. So that is a good program. And if someone's chronically ill already, just think it can take too long. But a lot of their philosophies and reasoning around copper, around iron, I think are really valuable. I'm not a fan. They used to at least recommend like organ complexes and liver and spleen for everyone, which I do not think is a good idea. I think we really need to make sure we're testing all of our levels and we understand exactly what's going on in our body before we even think about supplementing with anything that may drive our iron levels up, like beef liver, spleen, or an organ complex of some sort. And those are really good tools if we do have iron issues, iron saturation issues specifically. So that's serum iron. The next one I want to talk about is iron saturation, and that is iron that is inside of our cells. So this is what our cells actually use and what our body's actually using for iron. And when we have an issue of not having enough iron inside of ourselves, this is more likely when we're going to start to feel and experience some of the chronic issues that are more commonly associated with iron issues, anemia. I'm also going to talk about anemia. And there are 3 types of anemia, which also most people don't talk about here. So iron saturation is literally iron inside the cell. If your iron saturation is high, you have iron oversaturation. If your iron is low, you need more iron inside your cells. And we need to unpack some layers as to why you might be in either direction. 25 to 40% is generally where we land with this. Pretty basic. TIBC is the next one I want to cover, and TIBC is total iron binding capacity. The way I like to think about, this one is this marker tells us how much more or less iron your body really wants. And it should go in the opposite direction as your iron saturation. So if your iron saturation is trending high, we should see the TIBC low because your body doesn't need any more iron inside the cells. It's like, we're good, we're okay. And then vice versa. If we see iron saturation trending low, we should see or TIBC trending high, meaning our body wants more iron inside of its cells. Few caveats here. Sometimes they don't go in the opposite direction. Sometimes they go in the same directions, in which case we need to look at the bigger picture. I'll tell you, toxin load is most often what I see when it comes to bigger root causes as to with iron saturation, TIBC trending in the same direction. There can be other things, however, that is the most common thing that I typically see. And for TIBC, the range I typically use is 275 to 360. Typically, if we see that TIBC high, our body wants more iron. Now, there is also a caveat. There's one other piece that can impact TIBC, and that is estrogen levels. If we have truly high estrogen in our bodies, not perceived high estrogen, and if you listen to our episode from last week, you'll understand exactly what that means. But our estrogen to progesterone ratio, and it's more common for us to feel symptoms of estrogen dominance because our progesterone is low, not because we have true estrogen dominance. However, if we have true estrogen dominance, this can drive our TIBC levels up. So that is something we also need to kind of keep into account, especially because hormones can be a big factor when it comes to looking at iron issues, ferritin levels, like all of these things. And TIBC is trending low. First thing we're going to think is excess iron. However, inflammation, infection, and the liver can also play a role here. So you're going to start to see patterns here as I'm talking about these things. So let's talk about ferritin next, because this is where I see the biggest misconceptions when it comes to this. So ferritin, the optimal range that we use in our practice is 25 to 100. Now, if someone is starting to trend 30 or under, probably going to have some questions. If they're starting to trend 90 or higher, also probably going to have some questions. If someone has a lot of fatigue and hair loss, dizziness, cognitive issues, no matter what their ferritin is, I'm also going to have some questions here. So this isn't just labs. This is why anytime we look at labs, I can never just go over someone's labs with them without any context, because that's irresponsible. And there are so many different factors when it comes to all of this, where I need someone's symptoms and I also need a health history to even start to interpret labs a little bit more in depth, because all of this stuff really, really matters here. And there are certainly some things that I'll see if I just do a quick scan of some blood work. I hop on a call with someone, I'll probably have some notes as to what I think might be going on. And then I hear their story, I hear about their symptoms, I hear about their health history, and I'm like, oh, yep, this could definitely be playing a role. This could definitely be playing a role, or absolutely, like, this is definitely not playing a role. So all of these things are really, really important and really valuable. And if someone's only looking at your labs, and I also think this is where Western medicine like just really gets it wrong. We can't just look at labs. We can't just look at a number. We need to look at the entire story that your body's trying to tell us. And that includes labs from an optimal perspective, but also labs tell a story. It's almost like a storybook of what's going on inside your body from a cellular perspective. Symptoms also tell us a story. Your health history also tells us a story. And then if we combine those three stories, we're going to usually come up with a good answer. And or maybe we need to run one additional test to like pinpoint and solidify that one answer that we actually need. So ferritin 25 to 100. Now, ferritin is, the way most people understand this is iron storage. Yes, and that's not the full picture of ferritin, because here's the issue with ferritin. Yes, it looks at iron storage. However, it's also impacted by too many things to look at it all by itself. It's impacted by nutrients and nutrient deficiencies. So if you are lacking a lot of those cofactors of iron, you may not actually not have an iron issue. You may have a cofactor issue where iron's having a hard time getting inside your cells because it's missing the B vitamins, the zinc, the copper, the vitamin A, like all of these other things that are required to get the iron inside of your cells for your body to be able to use it. So there is a nutrient deficiency anemia that really is not related to iron itself, but related to all the cofactors that we need to be able to absorb it properly. So if we have gut issues, if we have low stomach acid, if we have a pretty highly processed food kind of diet, these can all impact your iron and your ferritin levels. And once again, it may not be an actual iron or ferritin issue. It might be a cofactor issue. You could also eat the best in the entire world, but if you can't properly break down and absorb your nutrients, it doesn't matter. So if you have gut overgrowth issues, which is a huge contributor to iron issues, I mean, I can give you every supplement in the entire world, and now I'm just giving you a different kind of Band-Aid. Versus if we want to look at root cause, well, yeah, we may need to supplement temporarily, but really we need to address the gut issues and all the things that are impacting gut so that you can actually digest your food and absorb the nutrients so that you don't have to be on the supplements. And that should be the goal of root cause healing and true like functional health when it comes to looking at the bigger picture and putting these things all together. Inflammation also impacts ferritin in both. By the way, these things can go in both directions. I'll say inflammation is typically, when inflammation is crazy high, we will usually see ferritin skyrocket over 100. I mean, I've seen ferritin in like the 400 to 600 range. And I'll tell you, when it's that high, we've got some pretty significant issues. I'll tell you, most commonly, it is mold illness or mold toxicity. That is the biggest driver here. And as we start to address that, we'll see. I was just talking to one of our clients last week. She came in and her ferritin, I think, was 437, just over 400. And in 6 months, it's down to just over 200. We're still working on some mold stuff. We're still working on some other gut stuff, but it's been cut in half. And for her, it's not an iron issue. It's the inflammation driving hormonal issues, gut issues, histamine issues, mast cell issues. Like, it's the mold toxicity that's driving all of these issues. And that's what we need to address first and foremost before we're gonna see everything come back into the most optimal kind of ranges. So inflammation, and there's inflammatory based anemia. That's the second type. And inflammation, man, it'll play such a big role. But we have to understand, okay, but what is driving the inflammation? Once again, if we just address the inflammation and we try to out-supplement the inflammation, we're doing the same thing. We're just putting a little Band-Aid on it and trying to drive down inflammation, as opposed to, okay, but what's causing the inflammation? Why do we have inflammation in the first place? And then we may have actual true iron deficient anemia, in which case we're not getting enough. Why are we not getting enough? Is it a nutrition thing? If you're a vegan or vegetarian, you probably need some sort of iron supplementation. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different avenues to go with that. But it's very hard to get all the iron and cofactors that you need from iron from a plant-based diet. It is very, very, very challenging. And there are some things that almost everyone who follows a long-term plant-based diet, we need to supplement with. And iron is one of those big ones that we will often need because it's very challenging to get from plants. So those are some things that can impact ferritin. Infection can also play a role here. We may also see, once again, the liver can play a role here. And there's a couple other things that can play a role, but I'll say like broad spectrum. Those are the biggest things that play a role when it comes to ferritin. Now, if we want to look at nutrient deficiencies, this is where the CBC comes into play. And then if we want to look at gut issues on top of that, this is where the CBC wood differential really comes into play here. So if we see like someone's red blood cell count, hemoglobin and or hematocrit starting to trend low, this is indicative of nutrient deficiencies related to the absorption of iron. When we see MCV, MCH, MCHC slightly elevated, B9, B12 deficiency, which can also be related because we need those to absorb the iron. When they're trending low, we'll often see other types of nutrient deficiencies. This might be a vitamin C deficiency. This might be B6, copper, zinc, vitamin A, like other things going on. By the way, you can have a normal CBC and still have anemia issues. So also keep that in mind. This is why we need to look at everything all together so we're getting the full picture, and we can't just look at a marker. This is what Western medicine really does, is they look at usually hemoglobin is their main way to look at this. Some will run ferritin and look at ferritin levels. Once again, you can have iron oversaturation and low ferritin, in which case supplementing with more iron can actually do more harm than good. And that's going to put a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on your liver in particular. So those are big things that we want to look at. You know, if we look at white blood cell count, that can help us look at inflammation. If we look at CRP, that's short-term inflammation, we can look at RDW. This can also give us some insight into like nutrient deficiency issues, inflammatory type issues, things like that. And we ideally want to see that under 13, the RDW 13% is what we're looking at. We don't consider too much of an issue when it's low. It's really when it's high when we look at this related to iron specifically. A couple other things that can play a big role here. Heavy periods. If you're someone with PCOS with heavy periods, you are having significant blood loss that can result in anemia type issues, iron type issues, in which case the bigger question then becomes, what's going on with your hormones? And we need to take a deeper look at your hormones and address that piece versus jumping right into the iron side of things. I'll also say, if we look at red blood cell, hemoglobin, hematocrit, when those are trending high, we also want to look at hydration, testosterone levels. And if you're living in a place with higher elevation, that can also play a role here. If you're a smoker, that can play a role. When those things are low, we also want to look at the thyroid because that can indicate a thyroid dysfunction. I also need to know if someone's a big runner because we might see some issues in some of these markers if someone's a runner. And I'm not talking you run a mile or two a week. I'm talking you're running consistently, like many, many, many miles. And that depends on the person. I'm not going to give them a specific number because I think it varies too much. But if you're a really avid runner, we need to take some of those things into account as well, which again, we need to know health history when it goes into all of this, because what if someone was a runner and these things were being driven down really low and it was just from the running? In which case, well, maybe we need to support our body differently. Maybe recovery needs to look different. Maybe we need to shift our running schedule. Like those things all play a really big role here. I'll also say if you have a significant blood loss of any kind, this will absolutely impact your iron. When it comes to pregnancy, iron is one of those things that we really wanted to monitor very, very closely as we go through that. And one of the things that we do support women as they certainly trying to conceive, we help a lot of women with, but also throughout someone's pregnancy, we also are trained in how to run and interpret those kind of labs and things to look for and things that we expect to shift and things that we want to be mindful of. And especially in the second and third trimester, most pregnant women need some form of iron support. However, the type of iron support that we want to look at can vary greatly. Yeah. So just throwing that out there, and same thing postpartum, especially if you lost a lot of blood in as you gave birth, whether that was through a C-section or a natural birth. Like we also want to keep a very close eye on that as well to make sure those things are supported as we enter into the postpartum period of time. So when it comes to supplementation, when it comes to medication, usually there's a few big options. Iron infusion is a big one. A lot of people don't feel better after an iron infusion. And I'd say if you were sub 10%, maybe talk to your doctor. If you're low in anything, definitely talk to your doctor. I also have to say that for legal purposes. But especially if you're sub 10%, like talk to your doctor, see if this is a good option, especially if you are very symptomatic. It's a Band-Aid because we're not addressing, okay, but why are you so anemic in the first place? Why do you have such an iron deficiency in the first place? Iron pills are commonly given. A lot of times they don't do well digestively with a lot of people. Once again, we're not addressing the bigger root causes of, yeah, you can take an iron pill, but why are you lacking in the first place? Is it just because you are not getting it from your diet? In which case, yeah, maybe iron pills are valuable. And what other kind of nutrient deficiencies do we have as a result of that? And are we also getting all those cofactors of iron that we really need? I'll also say if you are prone to histamine issues and or reactions, if you have a lot of like rashes, hives, itchiness, a lot of sinus congestion issues, sinus pressure, sinus headache issues, we also want to be aware of what form of iron are you taking. Iron bisglycinate, and there are a couple different forms that can fall into this. Sometimes you'll see it as iron bisglycinate. Sometimes you'll see it as ferrous bisglycinate. A lot of times will trigger a histamine reaction in people. So that may not be a good option. A lot of times if we see someone come into our practice and they have, let's say, between 10 to 20% iron saturation, they definitely have an iron issue. They definitely have nutrient deficiency issues. And we figure out whatever else their root causes are. A lot of times we're going to recommend beef liver, beef spleen, an organ complex, or a combination. If someone is sub 10% and really struggling from a symptom perspective and they don't want to do an iron infusion or they're not a good candidate for it, a lot of times we're going to recommend a combo of iron and spleen. And you can do this nutritionally. I mean, you can eat liver and spleen. You can go out to a grocery store and get those things. Most people don't love the taste of those things, in which case we are going to supplement. However, there are food options for everything. And the reason why we might do a combo is because spleen is going to be a little bit higher in iron. The liver, and it's also going to have some of the cofactors needed. Liver is going to have some iron and even more of those cofactors. Plus, anytime you eat an organ, it supports that organ. So once again, the liver has come up a lot as to reasons why we may be experiencing iron issues, and supporting the liver through a variety of ways, including supplementing with supplementing with liver, can be really beneficial for a lot of people. And a lot of times we'll just monitor the dosage. A lot of times we're not going to do full or standard dosages of those things. We might do a combination. It just kind of depends on the person. I'll say some people respond better to just a basic organ complex. It just really depends on the people and what their labs are showing, what symptoms that they're having. And when we figure out their root causes, like what is going on with those and what do we need to do to address those. But if someone's very symptomatic, we absolutely want to support their iron levels because that's an easy way to get a quick win and give them their body some natural support that they need probably to go through whatever else we need to address when it comes to these bigger issues and it's chronic health issues that can pop up here. So we may do a combination of those, and typically we're going to do that for 2 to 3 months and then ideally retest. Now, if someone has cofactor issues, but their actual iron levels look okay, maybe just a little bit on the lower side, we may recommend more of like a prenatal multivitamin. And you could be male, female, other. You could not be trying to get pregnant. You could be a male. Obviously, you can't get pregnant as a male. And it's not about that. It's about the nutrient concentration within these supplements. And oftentimes we'll use something like a prenatal essentials from Seeking Health. It is a prenatal multivitamin that's pretty broad spectrum. It's only 2 capsules a day. Some of these things can be a lot of capsules. So we try and keep those to a minimum because supplement fatigue is a real thing that can happen. And if you've been on a bunch of supplements before, 33 was where I capped out at one point with one of my providers. I was on 33 different supplements, not capsules a day, 33 different supplements, which is a lot of pills to take. And it's also a lot mentally to manage and remember to begin with. So, we're trying to keep those things to a minimum, both from a number of supplements, but also from the number of capsules that you have to take because it can be a lot. It can really just be a lot. And we're not trying to do that to people because we've experienced it ourselves as all 3 of us practitioners, and we're not trying to do that. So prenatal essentials by Seeking Health is a really good one. Sometimes that may look more like just a basic multivitamin with no iron. That might look like something like a twice daily multi from Designs for Health. That's one that we often recommend. Otherwise, if we're using like a liver or spleen or organ complex, Codage has some good ones. Smidge has some good ones. Vital Proteins we might use. There's a handful of brands that are out there that we may look at. The other thing we might use, and I'll say more often we're using this during pregnancy than anything else, but we may recommend some sort of heme-based product, which helps us build kind of the iron within our cells and help build red blood cells and help with the transportation of iron itself. And it just kind of depends on the person. And once again, like the labs that we see, what they're experiencing, what the nutrition looks like, what else we have going on. And during pregnancy, we're not doing any sort of big protocols of any sort. We're just trying to support the body from a nutrient level as best we can, because going through pregnancy, giving birth, and then postpartum and breastfeeding requires a ton of nutrients. And so we're really just trying to like stock up and stockpile and make sure these nutrients are as replenished as we can. In which case I do see some sort of like heme builder be a little bit more valuable in that circumstance. Other things that can really impact your iron levels here. So I talked about gut issues, gut overgrowth issues. I talked about the liver quite a bit. Toxin overload is a really, really, really big one. And inflammation, chronic viral issues. And kind of like how I want to wrap this up is I want to talk about a couple other markers that maybe aren't as commonly run. And when we're looking at deeper things going on, this may be some of these things may be more valuable to run, to look at. And I mentioned one already, and that was ceruloplasmin. So this is something I wouldn't normally run on someone. And if someone has a lot of anemia issues, yeah, this is probably something I'm going to want to look at. And this from a most basic standpoint, this basically looks at copper transportation. And when I talked about copper before, we can have excess copper or not enough copper. Copper is also one of those things where we can have copper inside of our cells, outside of our cells, and too much or too little in either way can be a big problem. Copper plays a really big role in iron transport. So, for example, I have a client right now who we've been working together for a while, experiencing a significant hair loss for several months now. From the markers that we've run previously, everything looks good. Thyroid looks good. Inflammation looks good. No signs of infection. The other iron markers that we've run, like so far, have looked really good. So we decided to run a deeper panel, and we discovered that zinc and copper specifically were playing the biggest role here in her iron issues. And I wouldn't have been able to recognize how big of a deal that was if we didn't run this ceruloplasmin marker. Now, we did run zinc and copper specifically, along with vitamin A and methylmalonic acid, MMA. Especially higher levels of MMA can cause other nutrient deficiencies like zinc and copper. So that's why we ran that marker specifically. And it's included in one of our more comprehensive anemia and iron panels. And when we looked at, her ceruloplasmin was low. Like low. So we decided to do some work more around the zinc and copper side of things more than anything else, because that's what presented as a bigger issue in that copper transport. So we're doing that through nutrition. We're also using some supplementation. We also ran an HTMA not too long ago and had found a couple patterns through there, but this blood work here really gave us like the biggest amount of information as to what was going on. She's also someone that struggled with anemia for a long time. It took us a long time to get her iron saturation levels up into a more optimal level and range. And now her iron's actually a little bit on the higher side, higher than we'd like to see it. And it's interesting, how big of a role is that playing in the zinc and copper? And is that really driving down some of the zinc and copper? What else is going on? So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle that can play a really big role here. Looking at some other things that are included in this, once again, this is going to be in the show notes, so feel free to take a look at that. We're also going to look at, going back to inflammation, homocysteine is another really big one that we're going to look at. ESR is another big one, and these are both different types of inflammatory markers that are a little bit more long-term inflammatory markers versus CRP or a C-reactive protein is a little bit more short-term inflammatory type issues. So they have different meanings here. We also looked at soluble transferrin receptor, STR. This is a marker that I don't think I've ever seen run outside of what we run for our own clients. And this is it's very similar to ferritin without getting into great detail. It's very similar to ferritin, except it's not impacted by inflammation and infection, which is crucial. And this was in a perfect range for this client that I just mentioned. But this is another one that can be really valuable and sometimes a little bit more helpful than ferritin itself. It's almost like a deeper layer of ferritin is the way I like to think about it, because it just gives us a deeper look into this. We also can look at the liver and then also blood sugar regulation, because blood sugar dysregulation is a huge stressor. So you'll see things on this lab like, we're running a metabolic panel that's going to have fasting glucose. We're also going to have insulin on here. We're also going to have HbA1c. You could add a C-peptide onto this. C-peptide is a more stable version of insulin. We also have LDH, which can look at blood sugar regulation issues. And then we also have, and I'm going to try really hard to pronounce this properly, fructosamine. And this also can be another type of blood sugar marker. It's more commonly run for people who have type 2 diabetes and to monitor that. Although I'll be honest, I don't think, once again, I've ever seen this run on anyone who has come to us with type 2 diabetes. And it can be a helpful marker. And just looking at what is the role that the liver and or blood sugar is playing in this, because once again, blood sugar dysregulation can be a huge stressor. It's also something that a lot of women will start to experience at some point in perimenopause. If you're not really on top of regulating your blood sugar. And this can be a really big deal. And I'm going to talk more about that when it comes to the next perimenopausal episode that I dive a little bit deeper into insulin resistance and how this will often present as we go into perimenopause and into menopause and why, and also how do we support the body to make sure we regulate that. So those are all things that you can look forward to here. So those are the big ones outside of like other specific nutrients that we're looking at. But those are the really big things that can play a role when it comes to iron. I think if I had to give you an overall message when it comes to iron is not as simple as one marker, whether that's ferritin, iron saturation, TIBC, serum iron, or anything else. Iron is complex. We need to look at all of the pieces all together. That includes labs, and it also includes, once again, symptoms and health history. There are so many things that impact iron, nutrient absorption. And if we're not looking at that full picture altogether, you're symptom managing, which if that's what you want, that is totally fine. That is totally your choice. And it's not root cause healing. It's not root cause medicine. It's not functional health as it should be practiced, in my opinion, at least. So those are all things that we really need to take into account. And once again, we offer free consultations. We will take a look at this. We will dive deeper. We will help you peel back a lot of these layers into understanding what is actually going on. So keep an eye out for that. If you want to book yours, you can there's a link in the show notes. You can also go to our website. I do know right now we are a little bit booked up, so bear with us as we continue to find spots to add here and there. If you are interested in booking, we also have a wait list going on. You can always message us or email us and we can put you on the wait list. Otherwise, we are booking primarily for January right now, outside of a couple like here and there kind of openings that are going to just like randomly pop up as the schedule allows it. So thank you for listening. As always, please like, subscribe, follow. If it resonates, a 5-star review really, really, really means the world to us. And if you have any additional question when it comes to iron, anything related to iron, please let us know. I can always do another episode all about iron and ferritin and all of the things that come along with this and how to better support your body. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.